Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Gay Buddhist Fellowship. It's time for our teacher, David Lewis. I consider David Lewis to be one of the wise men of GBF. He was there when I walked in about 7 or 8 years ago, and so I'm looking forward to hearing his talk today. David's been following the Dharma path for 49 years, has a degree in comparative religious studies. He's a graduate of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, their advanced practitioners program. And in addition to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, he shares the Dharma at the Mission Dharma and Insight Upper Market Sanghas and leads a weekly free drop-in meditation class for seniors. And so with that, I will turn it over. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Grisha. It's lovely to be here with all of you again this morning. It's a beautiful spring morning. Happy Mother's Day. Remembering not only our birth mothers, but our chosen mothers. The cool aunt, the doting grandmother, any mentors or teachers we had over the ages, and Mother Earth, Gaia, Mother Earth, and last but not least, a mother within each one of us, the feminine principle that we share. So, spring, it's not a surprise that Mother's Day happens in spring. It's a time of rebirth, time of starting over again. And of course, starting over again is a major principle, major practice in our meditation practice. In meditation, we start over again, over and over again, coming back to the here and now is a kind of rebirth. So, my talk today is the third in a trilogy of talks that I've given at GBF. I've also given this at another Sangha, so one or two of you, with apologies, might have heard this already, about the pandemic. And I think I can promise, this will be my last talk about the pandemic. That as I mentioned before, a year ago, a little over a year, at the beginning of March last year, I was the last live speaker at GBF before we went into shelter in place. And I talked about the beginning of the pandemic. And then about 6 months later, I was invited back to GBF and I talked about living in the middle of the pandemic with references to that previous epidemic of AIDS that many of us experienced or were on the fringes of at the very least, if not in the middle of. And so now I'd like to offer some reflections on the end of an epidemic, the end of a pandemic, and what that might mean to us. I've been participating in a lot of conversations, as I suspect you probably have been, about the end of the epidemic. We're contemplating what this means for us. What does the future hold? News sites, newspapers, and websites are just rife full of such speculation. So there are Dharma lessons to be learned from this inquiry. One of the things that's came up recently for a lot of my friends in the Dharma community is the whole vaccination brouhaha. I remember when I heard that vaccines were going to become available, when they developed a vaccine, I thought, well, that's just great. It'll be 3 or 4 months before I'll get mine, so I'm not going to worry about it. When the time comes, I'll get vaccinated, and that'll be a good thing. And I had a lot of equanimity. I wasn't feeling craving about it. It seemed like a far-off thing. And then all of a sudden, the vaccines became available locally, and my age group, the over 65s, popped up, and I could actually, in theory at least, sign up for a vaccine. And what I noticed is craving all of a sudden arose really intensely, a real intense craving. Like, I've got to get it. I've got to get it now. I've got to get on the list. And I called and I called and I called. Some of you might have had this experience trying to get an appointment. Finally, I figured out that if I got up in the middle of the night and called Kaiser at 3:00 in the morning, I could actually get an operator and I could actually get on the list. So, if you're mindful, if you practice mindfulness, you may have noticed that kind of craving. For those of you that wanted to get a vaccine, suddenly kind of taking over your world for a short time. You may have experienced something like that. And that craving is the craving of the second noble truth. That's the cause of suffering. Well worth paying attention to. So then I got vaccinated, and I felt this tremendous sense of relief. Like everything's okay now. But is it? Am I really less fragile than I was before? Or is that another delusion? So a year ago, in my first talk on the pandemic, I shared this quote, a beautiful quote from Ajahn Jayasaro, who's a Theravadan monk. And he wrote out a handwritten note and had it sent out to the various monasteries that he was affiliated with. And someone forwarded a copy of it to me. And I read it at the beginning of the pandemic a year ago. And I'd like to read it again this evening or this morning. It's just a paragraph. Ajahn Jayasaro said, beginning of the pandemic, the more closely we contemplate our bodies and minds and the world we live in, the more profoundly we become aware of the fragility and instability. When a crisis like this pandemic lays bare the unreliable and uncertain nature of the world, we are unsurprised. We know that what is happening right now is not a deviation from the norm. It is merely that the covers have been dragged away from the truths that most people spend their lives trying to ignore. With a daily grounding in the way things are, we can remain free from panic, anxiety, and depression. We can turn our minds to compassion. So I think that's as true now as it was a year ago. True now at the end of an epidemic as it was at the beginning. I've been reflecting on this fragility and feeling of vulnerability. When I think, with the emphasis on the word think, when I think about my future in this aging and unreliable body, I can become quite anxious and unsettled. I feel fragile and vulnerable. If, however, I reflect on the nature of this body and its impermanence, those things that I have in common with all other living beings, past and present, I can relax and experience this worldly life as being in harmony with nature. I'm still cognizant of my fragility, but no longer feeling so vulnerable. For me, thinking leads to anxiety, while being mindful fosters equanimity. And that's the essential difference between thinking and mindfulness. In Buddhist monasteries around the world, the monastics chant the Anicca Vata Sankhara chant every day. It's also the chant that's used at funerals. So the English translation of the first part of it goes like this. All conditioned things are impermanent. Their nature is to arise and pass away. To live in harmony with this truth brings the highest happiness. It's a beautiful thing to add to your practice every day, whether it's a chant or it's a reflection or post it on your refrigerator. All conditioned things are impermanent. Their nature is to arise and pass away. To live in harmony with this truth brings the highest happiness. Pandemics, as Ajahn Jayasaro said, are simply nature at work. It may have felt like we were frozen in time for a year, but if we looked around, nature was following its course. Seasons were changing, trees dropped their leaves and then grew new buds. Our bodies continued aging. Some people were born, others died. None of us remained quite the same. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "No one can step into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and you are not the same person." So the really fundamental operations of nature in the world and our bodies will not alter with the end of the pandemic. If this is indeed the end to it, if there is an end to this epidemic, that's a big question. We may not be at the end of it. The past is now memory, which is notoriously unreliable. The future has not happened yet, so it's only a fantasy. The future is either wishful thinking or anxious anticipation. In either case, it's a delusion. We often note in the mindfulness community that reflecting on the past often brings up regret. And reflecting on the future, planning, imagining what might happen, often brings up anxiety. So the only peace we can access is the peace of the present moment. The Buddha had a teaching, very beautiful teaching about this, which is called the Bodhicarata Sutta, Majjhima 131. It's another great thing to pin to your refrigerator. And here's the verse that is at the center of this sutta. The sutta, by the way, gets translated, the name of it's translated in various ways. It's been called an auspicious day, but it's also been called an excellent night. And I have my own favorite translation of it, which is on having a good day. So here's the verse at the heart of the Bodhicarata Sutta. The words of the Buddha. You shouldn't chase after the past or place expectations on the future. What is past is left behind. The future is yet unreached. Whatever phenomena is present, you clearly see right here, not taken in, unshaken. That's how you develop the heart. Ardently doing what should be done today, for who knows, tomorrow death might come. There is no bargaining with mortality and his mighty horde. Whoever lives thus ardently, relentlessly, both day and night, has truly had an auspicious day. So says the peaceful sage. So the shorthand for this teaching is, it's wise to live in the present moment. This is a practice that helped get me through this pandemic with some equanimity over the past year. Living in the present moment, no matter what's going on in your world, is the secret to happiness. Peace of mind is not dependent on the right conditions. It's simply a matter of being mindful of what's right before you. I was talking about this with a friend of mine a week or so ago, and she noted, she's a mindfulness practitioner, she noted that whenever she's thinking of the past or the future, stress arises. So I invite you to check that out in your own experience when your mind is in the past or the future, which for most of us is a good amount of our time. A good amount of our thinking energy is spent in the past or the future. Stress arises. Stress is another word for dukkha, which we also sometimes translate as suffering. But what exactly constitutes living in the present moment? We've all probably said or thought, I just want to live in the present moment. But what does that actually entail? Well, the Buddha was quite specific about it. Referring back to the verse that I just read from the sutta, here's what the Buddha recommended we do. Notice whatever phenomena is present, you clearly see right here, not taken in, unshaken. That's how you develop the heart. Ardently doing what should be done today. As we've talked about before in Sangha, Pali word, and Pali being the Buddha's language for heart, is the same word as mind, chitta. And this practice that the Buddha offered is essentially a practice of, as he says, developing the mind and the heart. It's a training program. Ardently doing what should be done today. So this verse is an instruction. The very instruction that we offer in meditation classes, and the intention that we set when we sit down to meditate. To clearly see what is present right here without being taken in or shaken by it. This is doing what needs to be done. That's a phrase that pops up over and over again in the suttas. Doing what needs to be done is simply paying attention as much as possible right now without getting attached. This is an instruction, as the last line of the verse tells us, is about how to have a good day. Really, how to have a good moment right now. And now. And now. That's what doing what needs to be done is. The Buddha sometimes described himself as one who did what needed to be done. And that's his invitation to us. Doing what needs to be done. I can't say that personally the past year has been without hardship. But I'm grateful to have been spared the kind of hardship and loss experienced by many people. Sheltering in place at home has been, for me, a rich opportunity to engage in this practice, day by day, moment by moment. My mindfulness practice infused itself into daily life more than any other time outside of a retreat. I discovered through my own direct experience, not thinking, but through my own direct experience that, as the Buddha recommended, the slower, simplified life supports waking up at home just as it does on a retreat. The artificial boundaries between formal sitting and mindfulness of everyday activities dissolved. This is an insight that I want to be careful not to lose touch with as our world continues to open up. And I would like to invite you all to reflect at some point on practices or habits or changes in your routine that perhaps happened in these past months that are worth holding on to, are worth maintaining as the world opens up. Perhaps you found ways of simplifying your lives, simplifying your home, that are worth continuing. And that's certainly true for continuity of mindfulness. If you've experienced that in these past months, mindfulness ideally is a 24/7 activity. Every moment of mindfulness conditions and fosters more moments of mindfulness. In other words, the more we do it, the easier it gets. So mindfulness is a lot like, as I've said before, mindfulness is a lot like learning to speak a language or learning to play an instrument. It's hard in the beginning. It seems really foreign to us. We have to put a lot of effort into it. But the more we do it, the easier it gets. And then we find at some point, it's hard to know exactly when you get to that point. We usually see it in retrospect. We find that all of a sudden it's become easy. Whether it's mindfulness or learning to play a musical instrument or learning a language, all of a sudden we find that we're proficient. And it's become easy and natural. We've done what needed to be done. The joy of waking up, even for the briefest moment, provides the energy and motivation for more of the same. So we do what needs to be done. We already have everything we need to wake up: a living body and consciousness. The world is also providing us with everything we need to wake up. Here's how Charlotte Joko Beck talks about it in a poem. Life always gives us exactly the teacher we need. At every moment, this includes every mosquito, every misfortune, every red light, every traffic jam, every illness, every loss, every moment of joy or depression, every addiction, every piece of garbage, every breath, every moment is the guru. Or this is how the Tibetan teacher Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche puts it. All that we are looking for in life is right here in the present moment. All we are looking for in life is right here in the present moment. Some of you know that one of my Dharma activities is I teach a meditation class, basically a how to meditate class for beginners or anybody else every Thursday morning. It's offered by Open House, which is a nonprofit organization that serves LGBTQI plus seniors. And I put a note in the chat about how you can get on the mailing list for that if you would like to have that Zoom link each week. Everybody's invited. It's free. It's a drop-in group. You don't have to sign up. But there's a wonderful group of LGBTQI plus seniors, mostly seniors. We're kind of regulars of that group, and we almost always have somebody new every week. And one of my seniors about a year ago, who was new to meditation, had never done it before, after coming to the group for 2 or 3 weeks, put his hand up at the end. Basically, we have a meditation, we have a sit, and then we talk about what our experience was in meditating. It's all about direct experience meditating. And this fellow put up his hand and said, he just looked baffled, and he said, why are we doing this? What's the point of meditation? Which is a really good question. We all probably had that question in our mind at some point, because it feels so unnatural when you're not used to it to sit down and essentially do nothing except watching the mind. And his question was, what's the point of this? And I really appreciated the question, because I think a lot of people experience that. some point. But also I had a little bit of trepidation because I thought, I hope we're not going to lose him. That's kind of, when you start asking that question, that's the point the point at which a lot of people think, well, I don't see the point of this, so I'm not going to do it anymore. But this guy stuck with us, and over the course of a year started developing his meditation practice. And just a few weeks ago, he put up his hand again, and he said, well, I've got something to report. He said, a strange thing happened in my practice, only it wasn't really my practice during the course of the week. And I said, well, please tell us, share that with us. And he said, well, I was watching TV like I do every night after dinner. I sit down and watch TV because that's how I that's how I unwind at the end of the day. And he said, all of a sudden, for some reason, I just turned off the TV and I just sat and watched my mind like you teach us to do every week. And he said, I found that very pleasurable. But he said, it kind of baffled me because I'm not quite sure why I did it. And he kind of presented it as a question, like, what do you think of that? And of course, being a meditation teacher, I thought it was just wonderful. He had had a subconscious insight that his habitual distraction of watching TV at night was not entirely satisfactory. His mindfulness practice had shown him that being awake is better than TV, better than screens. Mindfulness of the present moment is preferable to distraction. So he had reached that tipping point in his meditation practice where it had stopped being something really hard, really difficult, and it had begun being more natural, coming more easily. That's the point at which you don't turn back. That's the point at which you don't quit, because who doesn't prefer peace of mind to chaos? Who doesn't prefer the present moment to losing ourselves in the past or the future? The teacher, Michelle McDonald, says, when we understand how precious each moment is, we can treat each breath, each moment, as a newborn baby. So the Buddha was sometimes described, as I've mentioned, as he who did what needed to be done. Most of his teachings were instructions on the importance of doing what needs to be done. There's a version of his dying words. It's a verse on the Han, which is the big wooden block that is often used in Zendos to call Zen practitioners to meditation. And this wooden block is rung like a bell, sort of. You hit it with a block. And here's the verse that's often inscribed on the Han in Zendos. It's a version of the Buddha's dying words. May I respectfully remind you, great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Be awake in each moment. Don't waste this life. So that's what I have to offer for a formal talk. And I like, especially with GBF, because there's so much wisdom in this Sangha, I like to open it up for comments or questions, reflections. So please, anybody would like to offer comment, feel free to unmute yourself and either put your hand up or just speak up. Any questions, comments, reflections on the end of the pandemic? Chris, I see a hand.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that talk. Just going to offer two things out. Just recently listening to a neuroscience Buddhist long-term practitioner presentation, and so they were doing studies on people going into an MRI, and they connect them up with electrodes and ready to do a study in the MRI or whatever the machine was. And they'd have them in a waiting room waiting for a number of minutes or longer, not doing anything. And the electrodes were already on the person, so an area of the brain would light up that was sort of specific, a sort of a strange area of the brain that's sort of our narrator part of the brain. And so when they did the study, they went and asked, like, what were you thinking about when you were waiting, in a sense, or meditating, right? And I'm just going to read some of these. I was planning, thinking of things I have to do, thinking of things I did wrong, my resentments, future events that will make me happy, future events to avoid mistakes, loss, grief, pain, past or present, physical problem, and one's looks. Which kind of sums it up when you're sort of ruminating. And there's sort of also that was interesting is there's two types of attention. There's sort of an open, sort of dull attention that brains have, human beings' brains, primates. And then the other attention is a focus. There's a way we focus attention. So you got the focus attention or the sort of wide sitting there attention that actually sees things squiggling on the side of the eyes because it might be a snake or a bird attacking us or a dinosaur. So we react really quickly to that. We're prone to do that, right? Some people more strongly than others. In fact, if you take a child, a baby, an infant, and do these things to them, they do all these things and react to it. It's kind of interesting to watch. I work as a nurse, so I sort of saw that when I worked in a nursery. Anyway, we concentrate or we have this open awareness, right? But it's not the open concentrated awareness that you do in Vipassana. It's just a sort of vague sitting there. So anyway, most recently in this past year, sitting in my little cave of snow here going, what am I going to do with myself? Clean the closets 5 times, whatever it was. But I really tried to focus in on really enjoying making the bed, not listening to the radio, more about Trump, whatever, just enjoying making my bed. That was sort of Zen, chopping carrots, cooking kind of mentality. And that's strong, but of course I start ruminating about how I look today, or am I ever going to find a boyfriend, or, that resentment with my sister going back 30 years. I mean, I can do that all day long. So what I do is I would actually set my timer on my phone for 15 minutes or an arbitrary number. And when it would go off, I would just sit. I would sit anywhere in my place, in the corner staring at, I kind of discovered dust in areas you never know about. I'd sit, and then the alarm would go off, and I'd get up and do work. Try to be mindful, and not try, actually be mindful. And I would go through a 15 cycle of maybe 2 hours. It was wonderful. I got really spaced out. I would get really focused, and I'd get a really clean flat too. So it was kind of a win both ways. So anyway, I was just going to offer that out. Thanks for your talk.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you for all that evidence verifying the very point that I was trying to make. I appreciate that. Yes, we can be mindful anytime. Another technique that we often talk about in mindfulness is picking some activity like washing the dishes or taking a shower, but some activity you do every day where you kind of make an intention to be mindful whenever you do that activity. If it seems overwhelming to try to be mindful all the time, every day, then, pick an activity or two. I have one friend whose activity was walking through a doorway, and he made a vow to himself, and he's been doing this for years, is every time he walks through a doorway at home or any place, he's mindful. He kind of resets his mental computer to the present moment when he passes through a doorway. So there's a lot of ways to be mindful. Matthew, you have a hand up.
Hi, David. Thank you for the wonderful talk. I just wanted to ask you, what is the name again of the Tibetan chant that you that they say in the morning, and they're also at funerals? If you, I just wanted the name of that.
Hold on. That is.
You may have to spell it.
Let me remind myself here. That is, I I gave you the title in Pali, which is the way that I know it, Anicca Vada Sankhara. But Anicca, A-N-I-C-C-A, Anicca, is impermanence in Pali, and it's one of the three characteristics of existence and one of the most important concepts in Dharma. So some people just call this the Anicca chant, A-N-I-C-C-A.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Okay, good. Thank you. Yep, that's all, David. Thank you very much.
Any other hands? Any other comments? Wisdom from the Sangha? I know there's a lot of wisdom here. If not, I'm going to tell a funny story that Chris's comment triggered for me. He was talking about being hooked up to electrodes to measure mental activity. And there's a good story about that. A group of neuroscientists went to Tibet, or went to Dharamsala, northern India, where the Dalai Lama is, and asked the Dalai Lama's permission to do a neuro study of meditating monks, long-term practitioners. And the Dalai Lama, as you may know, is a real fan of science. He finds no conflict between science and Buddha Dharma. In fact, science tends to reinforce Buddha Dharma. And so he gave permission, and these neuroscientists came in and basically just turned over his monks, and the neuroscientists came in and they hooked them all up to electrodes and then told them to meditate, and they measured their mental activity. But they didn't really explain what they were doing to the monks until the end. And at the end of the study, the Dalai Lama invited the scientists to stand up and address the monks and answer their questions and tell them what they were doing. And one of the monks said, well, what exactly were you doing? And the lead scientist said, well, we were measuring your mind. We were studying your mind. We were measuring mental activity. At which point the monks all just broke out into hysterics and were rolling on the floor and holding their bellies and laughing at the scientist. And the scientist was completely befuddled. He didn't know what he had said that was so funny, and he asked the translator. He said, was it something I said? And the translator said, no. He said, it's just that in Tibet, the mind and the heart are the same thing, and that the location of the mind is here. It's right here. He said, you had the electrodes attached to the wrong place. So that's my funny story. Any other final reflections or thoughts? We're in no hurry. I'll have plenty of time.
Go ahead, Greg. Raise your hand up. Grisha.
Hi, my name is Greg, or Grisha, which is my Russian name. And I was actually would like to ask David and the whole Sangha, is that true, though, that the heart and the mind is the same place? Do we really think that we should strive for that? Can we have a situation when our heart, that is, our emotions are like emotional attachment, tell us one thing, but the reason tell us something completely different, and that would be legitimate conflict? What's your view on that?
Well, I would encourage you to do what the Buddha recommended, and that's check it out in your own experience. Check it out in your meditation. One of the things that I've noticed that has helped me understand that concept from the Buddha's time better is that sometimes it's hard to parse out. It's hard to differentiate between thoughts and emotions. Like, do our emotions arise from thoughts? if we get angry, we probably are angry about something. That emotion started with a thought. Or, on the other hand, do our emotions give birth to thoughts? We're angry, and all of a sudden we start thinking about everything we're angry about. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? Which comes first? Sometimes it's hard to parse those things out. Anyone else have a thought on that? Just check it out in your own experience. Like, where exactly is the mind? Can you locate the mind? And where exactly is the home of our emotions or feelings? Are they in a particular place in our body? Where's the mind? Where's the feelings? Great question. And the other logical question that it's a very Buddhist question that we encourage that arises out of that is, where am I? Where is the I in me? Exactly.
I've actually been, I think, doing that type of practice. It's become more pronounced in my meditation. And also I have a therapist where we do somatic work, so I can sense a little bit into the body. And what I'm noticing when I'm anxious, I really have some strong feelings in my chest. And the mind is kind of like, oh, I'm anxious and I want to get rid of it, change it, make it different, because anxious is unpleasant. And so it can create a little bit, almost like a war or a tussle between what the mind wants and what my heart center is sort of expressing, just feeling. And so I feel like they both, they feel a little bit separate, but they're both providing information. And my practice has been to kind of put a little more attention here in my heart center and allow the mind to be not in conflict with it, to be more curious about these sensations. And with time, they start to harmonize or integrate a little bit. So they're both useful, but I think most of us in Western culture, we're much more, mind cognizant, centric. And sometimes this area gets, short shrifted, So I'm trying to balance it out, putting a little more attention here and seeing if they can actually work and complement each other.
Thank you, G. That's a beautiful explanation. In the West, the mind and the heart are tend to viewed as a duality, and as you pointed out, we tend to give a lot more emphasis to what we call the mind, and not so much in the heart. And so that's the practice you're describing is something most of us Westerners could really benefit from, developing the heart. Appreciate that wisdom.
Okay, if there's no other hands up, it's about time for us to wrap up and do announcements and that sort of thing. Any last comments or questions for David? All right. Dana is the Pali word for generosity. Generosity is the first of our 10 perfections. It is a spiritual practice. So our Dana pays for speaker honorariums, rent at Bartlett Street, our quarterly newsletter. And in fact, we have a newsletter just about to go out and goes to many Buddhists in prison and outside of prison, but mostly prisoners. So please contribute what you can. $10 to $20 would really be helpful. Any other announcements? I did not look up next week's speaker. I didn't do my gig here. Let's see. Renee Rivera is the next week's speaker. Any other announcements? Okay. Let's see. Welcome to the newcomers that came along, and I hope you'll join us again. And Oswaldo, nice to see you again. So, David, would you like to offer your own merit, or would you like to use the GBF?
Oh, I'd be happy to offer merit of my practice. I always do it a little bit differently.
Okay.
So, recognizing that our practice benefits not just ourselves, but all beings everywhere. We wish that on behalf of all beings who want to be happy, just like we're happy, we want to be happy. The happiness we wish for ourselves, the peace of mind we wish for ourselves, we wish for all beings. May all beings be safe from danger and harm. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. May all beings everywhere, all sentient beings, live with peace and ease and abide in the present moment, just as we attempt to abide in the present moment. May all beings be free of suffering. Thank you, everybody. Lovely.
Thank you, David, and everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, David, for your beautiful talk. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.